the true story of Chris Watts and the grisly murders of his wife and 2 children, and realize that Chris Watts lied on almost every single question. I'm having a lot of trouble deciding whether or not I want to put this in my Unresolved Mystery series, because it's technically a case that's already been resolved, but at the same time it's a case that makes you go WTF. Hey guys, welcome back, or if you are new, welcome to my channel. My name is Courtney, and I'm here to give you the creeps, the creepy crawlies. If you're into true horror, I highly suggest that you hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell so you're notified every single time that I upload, because I come on here every single week and tell you guys another true and scary story, and today's story is one that I'm absolutely dreading telling you, because it's just that terrifying and scary and heartbreaking. So prepare yourself for that. So I feel like by now, the majority of us have at least heard of or seen the name Chris Watts, whether that be on Netflix itself or on the news in the past couple of weeks. Have you heard of him? Unfortunately, he's kind of a household name. For those of you guys who don't know who I'm talking about, Chris Watts is actually the subject of the newest Netflix true crime doc called An American Murder: The Family Next Door. Obviously, he's not a very good guy. Now, this Netflix true crime doc itself actually tells the true story of Chris Watts and the grisly murders that happened to his wife Shanann and his 2 daughters, Bella and Celeste. And this story is actually told via unedited video from investigators on the case, as well as social media from different people involved. To say the least, it is a very interesting and terrifying true crime documentary that I feel like everyone should check out. It's available on Netflix, obviously. But for those of you who haven't seen it or just are interested in watching the video itself, today I'm going to be talking about the true story of Chris Watts and the grisly murders of his wife and 2 children. That being said, guys, before we get into today's video, I did just want to give a trigger warning really quickly, a quick disclaimer, as I always do before these kinds of videos, just because the content within this video is, well, unsettling. So this story starts on August 13th of 2018. We are in Frederick, Colorado at around 2 in the morning. I know, we're starting early. This is when Shanann Watts gets dropped off at her house by her friend Nicole after a business trip that they took together. Like I said, it is 2 o'clock in the morning. It's very early, so the 2 women separate pretty quickly. Shanann goes into her house and goes to sleep, and Nicole drives home to get some rest herself. That being said, at this point in Shanann's life, she's pregnant with her 3rd child. All 3 of her kids, Celeste, Bella, and this new baby, are fathered by Chris Watts, her husband, and the 2 of them are very excited to welcome their first son into the world. Now, being a close friend of the family, Nicole knows exactly how excited Shanann and her husband Chris are to welcome this new baby into the world. That being said, she does have a mental note in the back of her mind that Shanann has a 9 a.m. OBGYN appointment the following morning. With that in mind, she decides to give Shanann a call after this OBGYN appointment is over, just so they can talk about it, get updates, you know, best friend stuff. However, after multiple attempts of trying to reach out to Shanann, Nicole is unable to get in contact with her. And this worries her to the point of reaching out to the doctor's office itself to see if Shanann showed up for this 9 a.m. OBGYN appointment, which she hadn't, which is concerning, because why would you miss that if you're that excited about having a new child? Or why would you miss that at all, for that matter? So as I said, Nicole was pretty concerned with why Shanann would have missed this appointment, so she decides to go to the Watts family home to kind of see what's going on, because obviously Shanann would still be there, right? Well, when she gets there, she finds that Shanann's car is still in the driveway. However, after knocking on the doors and looking through the windows, she sees that it looks like no one is home, which again is kind of concerning, because why would she leave with her children without the car? And after a few minutes of trying to get inside and just get in contact with Shanann while she was at their house, Nicole decides to reach out to Chris in order to kind of get access into the home, or at least have him come back to their house and help them look for Shanann, because obviously he'd be concerned, right? Wrong. That being said, Chris does have a pretty good facade going, and he tells Nicole that he will be there as soon as possible, and he leaves the worksite that he is at that afternoon. While she's waiting, Nicole decides to call the police just to see if they can kind of help her gain access to the house, because she's slightly worried that Shanann might be hurt within the home and just can't come to the door. Now, it is really important to note that Shanann did have something called lupus, which of course is an autoimmune disease if you didn't know what that was. So it's not out of the ordinary for Nicole to be concerned that somehow her friend may have gotten hurt or become incapacitated while she was home by herself with her kids. That in mind, she calls the police while she's waiting for Chris, and together they kind of wait for Chris to get there because the police can't go into the home without probable cause unless he has Chris's permission to enter. That being said, when Chris does arrive back at the house, he grants permission to the police officer as well as Nicole to come into his home and help him look for his wife. Because again, he's a concerned husband. Can I foreshadow any more about how he is not a concerned husband? I don't know. That being said, when they initially started going through the home looking for Shanann or any clues as to where she would have gone, Chris is extremely cooperative. He even points out different things to the officer that he notes were kind of out of the ordinary within the home itself. For example, he noted that his two daughters, Bella and Celeste, have these blankets that they go everywhere with, and that those blankets weren't in the home, which to any father would be concerning. He also noted to the officer that Shanann's cell phone was still in the home, and then he points out that this phone is her, quote, lifeline. And then finally he finds Shanann's wedding ring still in the house, even though Shanann herself isn't in the house. So you can see the kind of picture this is painting. Now it's at this point in the timeline that Chris and Shanann's neighbor offers to help with the investigation by providing security footage that he captured the night before. And this is where things get interesting, okay? Now this security camera that the neighbor has actually points to his driveway and in the process captures a part of the Watts driveway. And it's motion activated to record any time that something moves within the frame. So in the wee hours of the morning of August 13th, 2018, this security camera captures Chris Watts backing his truck into his driveway before loading what seems to be a relatively heavy object into the cab of the car before driving away. Now Chris, who is watching this video with the officer and his neighbor, excuses this away by saying that he was loading tools into the back of his truck before driving off to work at around 5:15 that morning. Now from the officer's perspective, this was a pretty believable excuse coming from Chris, especially because it matched his alibi of being at work that morning. So with that in mind, Chris as well as the officer thank the neighbor for giving them the information and go to exit the home. However, once Chris exits, the neighbor pulls the officer aside and lets him know that Chris is acting very strange. He tells the officer that ordinarily Chris is a very shy and reserved person, so the fact that he's jittery and willing to help and very outgoing throughout this entire process was really strange for this neighbor. He also tells the officer that this security camera only goes off when there's movement outside, and that he has never caught Chris loading tools into the back of his car before leaving for work. That said, the officer does remind this neighbor that Chris is going through a strange situation that he's never been put in before, which might be the reason why he's not acting like himself. And the neighbor doesn't disagree, however, he does note that he has known Chris for a long time and that this is not how he would expect Chris to react in this situation. After this private conversation, the officer again thanks the neighbor for his help with the investigation and then goes to leave the home. However, this time he has this mindset of maybe this situation is a little bit more sinister than Chris originally let on. Like, I'm gonna keep an eye on him. Okay? Now this is when Chris's actions start to become even more suspicious to investigators who are working on this case, because it is at this point in the timeline that he starts reaching out to different media outlets, asking for attention on his wife's disappearance, which is weird if he is a shy guy that doesn't like to be in the spotlight. And what's even more bizarre is the fact that he tells one of the reporters that he and Shanann had a very emotional conversation just before she disappeared. And when I say just before, I mean like hours before she disappeared. Now this obviously set off warning bells in the minds of the investigators, just because initially Chris had not mentioned any sort of argument or emotional conversation that occurred within the hours leading up to Shanann's disappearance, like he just conveniently forgot that his marriage was on the rocks. Now investigators, they thought the same thing. So on August 15th of 2018, 24 hours after Shanann and her two daughters were declared as missing, they decided to bring in Chris Watts for questioning. It was also at this point in the timeline that they started going through Chris's phone records, where they found some pretty juicy stuff. Okay? So through these phone records, investigators were able to find that in the weeks leading up to Shanann's disappearance, she, as well as her two daughters, took a 6-week vacation to North Carolina to visit family, and that during that time, Chris and Shanann had spent pretty much the entirety of that trip arguing via text message. Likewise, they actually found that Chris had also spent that time exchanging text messages with a woman named Nicole Kissinger. A lot of Nicoles within this story, sorry. And for that reason, they decided to also bring in Nicole Kissinger for questioning. And Nicole she spills some tea, okay? Now, for obvious reasons, Nicole is really concerned with the entirety of the situation. Of course, she wants the safe return of these two girls as well as their mother. However, she's also very concerned with her own health and safety, seeing how she's been romantically connected with this dude who may have murdered his family for her. Like, that's not good. And she tells investigators everything. She confesses to the affair itself, like news to me. He said that they were separated, and she said that they had been on multiple trips together and just done different things in a romantic nature because she thought that he was separated from his wife. Investigators also asked Nicole if she had in any way, shape, or form insinuated to Chris that him having a previous marriage as well as 2 children already would have been a problem for her, which of course it wasn't. Like, if that bothered her, she wouldn't have been with him in the first place. And that's exactly what she told investigators. Like, no, that wasn't an issue for me, and I would never ever insinuate that to him, I swear. Now, after she gives her answers to each of these questions, investigators are happy with Nicole's responses and decide to move their attention towards Chris and his possible involvement with the disappearance of his wife and 2 children. And it was at this point in the timeline that investigators decided to kind of insinuate to Chris that they knew about his affair. They don't know that we know that they know, you know? And of course he denies this, even though investigators know that he's lying, so of course they just caught him in this lie. And then they ask him to take a polygraph test because he's so sure that he wasn't doing exactly what he was doing. So on August 15th of 2018, Chris Watts submits to this polygraph test. He walks into the room, they hook him up to this machine, and they proceed testing him by asking him various different questions regarding the disappearance of his wife and 2 children. After the test is complete, the investigators started looking at the results of his polygraph test and realized that Chris Watts lied on almost every single question. Like, he completely failed this test. No shocker there. Now, initially, Chris denied even lying on this polygraph test. He was adamant that he told the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, okay? Chris also continues to deny that he had any sort of involvement with Shanann's disappearance or with his children's disappearance, which, of course, the investigators were like, hey, we know that you did. At this point, we know you're lying because polygraph test. And after a little bit of a gentle conversation, they ended up bringing in Chris's dad to kind of talk a little bit more sense into Chris. And this is when Chris Watts confesses to the murder of his wife and children. Now, during this confession, Chris actually claimed that he had killed his wife in a fit of rage because he had caught her murdering their 2 daughters. However, friends and family of Shanann know and claim that she would never do something like this, that she loved her children, that her family was her life, and it was also very obvious on Facebook and other social media platforms that this was the case. She loved her children, she loved her family, there is no way she would do this. And for that reason, it was really difficult for the public to kind of back this claim that Chris had murdered his wife in a fit of rage over their deceased children. Now, regardless of whether or not investigators believe Chris's story, they were able to get out of him an approximate location on where these bodies were buried. So if you guys remember from the beginning of this story, Chris had actually come from a job site on the morning of his wife's disappearance when Nicole had called him saying that they couldn't get in touch with one another. So it wasn't at all surprising to investigators when Chris admits to burying the bodies at that job site. Investigators went out to the location and started canvassing the area, and before long they were able to locate the bodies of Shanann Watts and her 2 children. That said, come November, Chris changes his story once again and finally gives Shanann's friends and family the closure that they need to move on from this tragedy. Now, according to this updated confession, on the morning of August 13th, 2018, Shanann Watts came home and the couple proceeded to have a conversation about their marriage. Now, at some point during this emotional conversation, an argument broke out between the couple, which triggered Chris to attack his wife Shanann. And according to this new confession, this attack resulted in Shanann's death. Now, like I said, this new confession did provide a lot of closure to the friends and family of Shanann Watts and her 2 children. However, that doesn't change the fact that their lives were cut incredibly short at the hands of a man who is supposed to love them, protect them, and support them. And today, Chris Watts is serving the remainder of his sentence at a maximum security prison in Wisconsin, which is where this story ends. That being said, guys, it has been recently brought to my attention that there is some paranormal activity that has surrounded this case. Now, I have not had the chance to look into the validity of those paranormal claims. However, you know how much I love a good paranormal video. So if you're interested in seeing a video where I talk about those EVPs and other situations that surround the case in terms of the paranormal normal? Let me know in the comments below because you know that I would love to dive into that portion of this case with you guys. But with that in mind, I think that's pretty much it for today's video. If you made it all the way here to the end and liked what you saw, make sure you give me a big thumbs up. It really helps out my channel. Also leave a comment down below letting me know what you think of the true story of Chirs Watts and the grisly murders of his wife and 2 children, because I just think this case is freaking bananas and I'd love to get your opinion on it. And finally guys, thanks so much for watching. My name is Courtney. I run a true horror channel here on YouTube. I like to create content telling you guys scary stories every single week, so if that's something you're interested in seeing more of, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell so you're notified every single time that I upload. And with that said, I'll see you all next week for another new video. Bye.